Power crumbles in many ways, but rarely does it collapse in a manner as grotesque and unforgettable as the death of King Philip II of Spain. Here was a man who once bent the destinies of nations to his will, a monarch whose dominion stretched from the silver mines of the New World to the lush islands of the Philippines. For decades, he stood as the great Catholic champion, the architect of an empire where the sun never set. Yet his final and most merciless adversary was not the fleets of England, nor rebellious Dutchmen, nor even rival monarchs across Europe. It was his own body, his own flesh, turning against him, decaying inch by inch, feeding parasites and birthing worms while he still drew breath. The year was 1598. Within the stone walls of the Escorial Palace, that monumental complex Philip had ordered built to stand as a symbol of Spanish greatness, a theater of horror unfolded that no courtiers, no priests, and no physicians could disguise. What should have been a solemn death of dignity for one of the greatest rulers of Christendom instead became a long descent into degradation, a grotesque display of nature's pitiless law, that even kings, no matter how exalted, wrought as any other man. Philip was 71 years old, a remarkable age for the 16th century. His body had been weathered by decades of labor and sickness. From his early 30s, gout had tormented him, gnawing at his joints until his fingers curled into claws and his feet swelled to the point where every step was agony. This affliction had grown so severe that by the 1590s, he could scarcely walk and was often carried about like an invalid. Arthritis compounded the torment, freezing his body into stiffness, so that even scratching his own head or lifting a goblet became impossible. Still, he clung to his legendary work ethic. Every state paper of importance passed through his hands, his spidery annotations, often a single word, no, deciding the fates of millions. But even the hardest iron rusts, and in the spring of 1598, the rust finally overwhelmed the king. What began as fever and weakness soon revealed itself as something far more sinister. Abscesses broke out on his knee and hand, swelling like angry boils, bursting foul pus that stank even when freshly drained. Doctors, bound by humoral theory, the primitive medical science of their age, bled him repeatedly, applied caustic poultices of mercury and arsenic, and pressed hot irons to his sores. Nothing helped. Instead, the infection spread. His body became a landscape of ulcers and lesions, each one leaking, weeping, never healing, only birthing new torment. By the time summer's heat descended on central Spain, Philip was entirely bedridden. He could move only his head and one arm. The king of half the world, once approached with elaborate bows, now lay helpless as servants lifted him like a child, wiping his soiled body when he fouled himself, turning him when the stench grew unbearable. Etiquette dissolved before raw necessity. No amount of incense or perfume could conceal the odor that seeped from his chamber and into the corridors of the Escorial. Courtiers passed by with perfumed cloths pressed to their noses, whispering of the smell of a corpse that had not yet died. The sores multiplied, erupting across his chest, his groin, his thighs. They did not merely ooze, they festered, feeding unseen hosts. The bedding beneath him was constantly damp with sweat and discharge, the perfect breeding ground for vermin. And soon, they came. First lice, crawling through his hair, his beard, his sheets. Attendants picked them from him by the handful, only to find more within hours. Some swore they could see lice hatching directly inside the pus-filled wounds, crawling from the king's flesh as if he were breeding them. The sight horrified even the most hardened priests. The monarch whose touch had once been believed to heal scrofula was now a living nest of parasites. And then came the flies. Drawn by the stench that no sealed window could contain, they slipped into the chamber, circling, landing, laying eggs. The larvae hatched quickly in the August heat, and maggots began to writhe inside his open sores. Attendants scraped them away daily, filling basins with wriggling handfuls, only to return the next morning to find the wounds alive again, crawling with new generations. One ulcer on his hip grew into a cavernous hole so deep the bone could be seen. From this single wound, attendants removed matter enough to fill silver basins twice a day. And still it grew, still it consumed him. Witnesses wrote that maggots burrowed deeper when disturbed, disappearing into the living flesh of the king, literally eating him alive. The horror did not stop with his skin. The flies found his nostrils, his mouth, his ears. Lacking the strength to brush them away, Philip endured as they crawled across his face, into his body, and laid their eggs in every crevice. Some historians believe he developed myiasis, larvae consuming not only the dead tissue but invading the living as well. His body was not only decaying, it was becoming a colony, a hive. And all the while, Philip remained lucid. His mind stayed sharp even as his flesh rotted. He prayed daily, demanded Mass be held at his bedside, clutched his crucifix, and confessed his sins. He reminded his son, the future Philip III, to govern with humility, gesturing weakly at his own ruined body as evidence of power's fleeting nature. He told him, "I have been treated like an old dog." It was perhaps the most bitter lesson a father could give a son, that a crown cannot shield you from worms. His attendants wept as they tended him, but duty bound them. One chamberlain was assigned solely to remove lice. Priests whispered prayers over him as his screams echoed through the halls whenever his body was shifted, every movement tearing at his ulcers, ripping open raw flesh. His bedding could not be kept clean, within minutes it was stained again with pus, blood, and waste. The Escorial, built as a monument to Spain's eternal glory, had become a charnel house, a tomb that swallowed its builder before his death. By September, his condition was unbearable. Diarrhea weakened him further, soaking the sheets that already stank of pus and rot. His legs swelled grotesquely with fluid as his kidneys failed. His abdomen ballooned. His skin split under the pressure, creating new ruptures that poured more filth onto the bed. The heat of that summer baked the chamber like an oven, quickening decay. Even the crucifix he clutched could not keep the flies away. Priests anointed him with oil for last rites, only for insects to land on the holy liquid, mingling divine symbol with corruption. And through it all, Philip endured. Not silently, his cries of pain were heard throughout the palace, but faithfully, convinced his agony was God's will. If this was divine punishment, he accepted it. If it was a test, he bore it. The most Catholic king, who had burned heretics by the hundreds, now became a living example of flesh undone, a king consumed before his courtiers' eyes. At last, on the morning of September 13, 1598, Philip lay gasping for breath, his lungs filling with fluid, his chest rattling like a broken bellows. At 5 o'clock, with the crucifix of his father pressed to his chest, he exhaled one final time. The ruler of the greatest empire in the world was gone. Even in death, the horror continued. His body was so decayed that when embalmers attempted to move him, parts broke away. Perfumes, spices, and chemicals could not mask the smell. His funeral was hurried, his coffin sealed quickly, the corpse too fragile to display. And yet the memory of his passing could not be sealed. Word spread across Europe, Philip II, the mighty king, had been eaten alive by vermin, consumed by his own corruption. Some rejoiced. In Protestant lands, pamphlets painted his suffering as divine retribution, justice for the Inquisition and his bloody wars. In Spain, official accounts softened the truth, praising his piety, his acceptance of suffering, his dignity at the end. But no perfume of words could erase the reality witnessed by dozens. The king who ruled half the globe had died in filth, writhing under lice and maggots. His death stands as one of history's most grotesque reminders that power is temporary, glory is fleeting, and all men, be they peasant or emperor, are equal before decay. Philip had built an empire, raised palaces of stone, commanded fleets that carried the wealth of continents. But in the end, his empire shrank to the size of a bed, his armies were lice, his conquerors maggots. The sun that never set on his dominions finally set on him, leaving only the memory of a monarch who learned too late that the body cannot be ruled. From sovereign to carrion, from master of the world to food for worms, not after death, but while still alive, still aware, still praying. That is the legacy of Philip II's final days. A spectacle of horror that outlasted his victories, staining his memory as much as his conquests ever glorified it. For if history remembers kings by the manner of their end, then Philip II of Spain will forever be remembered not for the empire he commanded, but for the worms that commanded him.